Preston Walsh thought he had committed the perfect crime. He had the high-powered job, the secret mistress, and a foolproof prenup that was supposed to leave his wife Simone with absolutely nothing. He spent months celebrating his victory before the divorce was even finalized, bragging that he was about to take her for everything she was worth. But he forgot one crucial detail: he never actually asked who her family was. When the judge finally asked the question that changed everything, Preston's laughter died instantly. "You are not going to believe the twist in this courtroom, nightmare." The cork of the Dom Perignon popped with a sound that echoed like a gunshot through the private dining room of the Golden Steer, the city's most pretentious steakhouse. Preston Walsh leaned back in the red leather booth, swirling the golden liquid in his crystal flute. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, Brittany, his executive assistant, and the reason his marriage was ending, and grinned. "To freedom," Preston toasted his voice, dripping with arrogance, "and to the fact that tomorrow I become a very, very rich, single man." Brittany giggled, clinking her glass against his. "Are you sure, Preston? I mean Simone. She's been so quiet. Doesn't that worry you? Usually when people get served divorce papers, they scream. They throw things. She just signed the receipt." Preston waved a hand dismissively. "Babe, you're worrying about a mouse. Simone is a librarian. She archives dust for a living. She doesn't have the fight in her. That's why I married her 5 years ago. I needed someone manageable. Someone who looked good on my arm at firm dinners, but didn't ask questions about where I was at night." He took a long sip of the champagne, savoring the taste of what he believed was total victory. "Besides," Preston continued, leaning in conspiratorially, "you're forgetting the prenup. My lawyers drafted it. It's ironclad. It creates a complete separation of assets acquired during the marriage if one party contributes less than 10% to the household income. Simone makes pennies. I make $500,000 a year. The house, the cars, the investments, it's all in my name, and the prenup keeps it that way. She walks away with her 2015 Honda Civic and her clothes. That's it." Brittany's eyes widened greedily. "So we keep the lake house." "We keep the lake house," Preston assured her. "We keep the downtown penthouse. We keep the portfolio. I'm telling you, tomorrow is just a formality." Judge Abernathy is presiding. He's old-school hard-nosed. He hates wasting time. He'll look at the prenup, bang his gavel, and Simone will be out on the street by noon. Preston checked his Rolex, a gift he had bought for himself using the joint savings account he had just drained. He felt like a king. He was a senior associate at Sterling Cooper and Associates, one of the top firms in the city. He was handsome, successful, and he had successfully outsmarted his wife. He thought back to the night he served her the papers. Simone had been sitting at the kitchen island reading a book. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked at him with those deep, dark eyes of hers, calm and unreadable. "Are you sure you want to do this, Preston?" she had asked. Her voice hadn't trembled. It was steady. "I'm sure, Simone," he had sneered. "I've outgrown this. I've outgrown you." She had simply nodded, closed her book, and walked upstairs. Weak Preston thought now, slicing into his medium-rare porterhouse. She's pathetic. She doesn't even know she's been played. He had no idea that while he was eating a $200 steak, Simone wasn't crying. She was sitting in a home office he rarely entered, organizing a stack of documents 3 inches thick. And she wasn't alone. Simone Hayes stood in front of the mirror in the guest bedroom, adjusting the collar of her cream-colored blazer. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. For 5 years she had played the role Preston wanted, the quiet, supportive wife. The black woman who should be grateful that a successful, charismatic man like Preston Walsh had chosen her. She knew what his friends said behind her back. She knew they thought she was a charity case he had picked up from the public library. They saw her job an archivist for historical legal documents as quaint, boring. They didn't realize that archivist meant she knew how to find things. It meant she knew how to trace paper trails that people thought were long buried. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text from a number saved simply as Dad. Text. Are you sure you want to do it this way, honey? We can crush him before he even steps into the building. Simone typed back quickly. Reply. No. He needs to say it in court. He needs to be the one to dig the hole. I want him to feel it. Text. Understood. See you at 9 a.m. I love you. She put the phone away. She thought about the day she met Preston. He had come into the library looking for old property records for a case. He was charming then, or so it seemed. He had flirted with her, and she, being lonely and perhaps a bit naive, had been flattered. When he proposed 6 months later, he had presented the prenup with a smile. It's just standard babe, he had said. My firm requires it for all Partners Track associates. It just says what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. It protects both of us. He had assumed she wouldn't read the fine print. He assumed she wouldn't understand the clauses about intellectual property and equity holdings. He was right about one thing she hadn't argued. She signed it. But Preston had made a fatal error. He had used a template prenup from his own law firm, a template that had a very specific bad faith clause buried on Herford. How 40. A clause that stated if one party concealed assets or committed adultery, the separation of assets was voided and the offending party forfeited 100% of marital assets to the victim. And Preston had been sloppy. Receipts for jewelry she never received. Hotel bookings in Cabo, when he said he was in Chicago for a deposition. Texts synced to the iPad he left in the living room because he thought she was too stupid to know the passcode was 1234. Simone looked at the file box on the bed. It wasn't just proof of cheating. It was proof of insider trading, proof of illegal kickbacks he was taking from clients. Preston thought he was divorcing a librarian. He didn't know he was divorcing the daughter of the man who literally wrote the book on family law in this state. She picked up the box. It was heavy, but she didn't mind the weight. It felt like armor. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old wood. It was 8:55 a.m. Preston walked in like he owned the place. He was wearing a 3-piece Italian suit. His hair slicked back, a smug grin plastered on his face. Brittany wasn't there. He wasn't that stupid. But his lawyer, a shark named Roger Sterling. No relation to the firm, just a cheap imitator, was already organizing papers at the plaintiff's table. Simone walked in 2 minutes later. She was alone. She wore a simple suit and carried a single leather briefcase. Preston leaned over to Roger and whispered, "Look at her. No lawyer. She's going to represent herself. This is going to be a slaughter." Roger chuckled. "Prosa litigants are my favorite snack. We'll be out of here by lunch." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "The Honorable Judge Thomas Abernathy presiding." Judge Abernathy swept into the room. He was a terrifying man, 60 years old, thick grey eyebrows, and a reputation for having zero patience for foolishness. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and glared at the room. "Docket number 4492, Walsh versus Walsh," the clerk announced. "Appearances," the judge grunted. "Roger Sterling for the plaintiff, Preston Walsh, Your Honor," Roger said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "We are ready to proceed with a summary judgment based on the prenuptial agreement." "And for the defendant?" The judge looked at Simone. Simone stood up. Her voice was clear, lacking any of the timidity Preston expected. "Simone Walsh, representing herself, Your Honor, although I am reverting to my maiden name immediately." Preston snorted audibly. The judge shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Mr. Walsh," Judge Abernathy barked, "is something funny?" "No, Your Honor," Preston said quickly, though he was still smirking. "Just, my wife has a flair for the dramatic. She's a librarian, you see. She reads a lot of fiction." "Proceed, Mr. Sterling," the judge said, turning his attention back to the lawyer. Roger Sterling launched into his speech. "Your Honor, this is a simple case. The parties signed a prenuptial agreement 5 years ago. Mr. Walsh is the primary earner. Mrs. Walsh has contributed negligible income to the marriage. Per the agreement, Mr. Walsh retains the marital home, the investment accounts, and his retirement funds. We have prepared the order for your signature." Roger slid a paper across the bench. Preston tapped his fingers on the table, already thinking about the victory lunch. "I see," Judge Abernathy said, reading the document. He looked over his glasses at Simone. "Mrs. Walsh, do you contest the validity of this prenuptial agreement?" The room went silent. Preston watched her, waiting for the stuttering, the begging. "No, Your Honor," Simone said calmly. "I do not contest the validity of the agreement. In fact, I am relying on it." Preston frowned. "What does that mean? However?" Simone continued, opening her briefcase. Sterling seems to have omitted a few pages when he summarized the document for the court. Specifically, Article 14, Section B. Roger Sterling froze. He shuffled his papers frantically. "Article 14, Preston whispered aggressively. "What is she talking about?" "And," Simone raised her voice slightly, "I would like to submit evidence regarding the bad faith clause. I have here itemized credit card statements, hotel receipts, and sworn affidavits proving that Mr. Walsh has been maintaining a separate residence with a Miss Brittany Saunders for the past 8 months using marital funds." She walked forward and placed a thick binder on the judge's bench. The sound of the heavy binder hitting the wood was louder than the gavel. "Adultery," Roger Sterling said, trying to recover. "Your Honor, this is a no-fault divorce state. Alleged infidelity is irrelevant to the division of assets." "Not according to the contract you wrote, Roger," Simone said, turning to look at the lawyer. She didn't look at Preston. "The contract states that infidelity voids the asset protection clause for the offending party." Judge Abernathy flipped open the binder. He scanned the first page, then the second. His eyebrows went up. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, which was a very bad sign. "Did you draft this prenuptial agreement?" My firm did, Your Honor, 5 years ago." "Then you should know what's in it," the judge snapped. "This clause is quite clear. If Mr. Walsh cheated, he doesn't just lose the protection, he forfeits his share, all of it." Preston's face went pale. He stood up, ignoring his lawyer's hand trying to pull him down. "That's a lie," Preston shouted. "She's lying. She's just a bitter housewife trying to squeeze me for cash. I make the money. It's my money." "Sit down, Mr. Walsh." The bailiff stepped forward. "I will not sit down." Preston yelled, his arrogance turning into panic. "She's nobody. She comes from nothing. She scrubbed books in a basement while I built a career. I'm a senior associate at Sterling Cooper. Do you know who I am?" The courtroom fell into a deadly silence. Simone finally turned to look at him. Her expression was one of pity. Judge Abernathy slowly closed the binder. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Preston with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "Mr. Walsh," the judge said softly, "you just asked if I know who you are. The better question is, do you know who she is?" Preston blinked, sweating. "She's Simone. She's nobody." The judge leaned forward. "Counselor, you claim to be a top lawyer in this city. You work for Sterling Cooper and Associates." "Yes," Preston said, straightening his tie. "And do you know who the silent majority partner of Sterling Cooper and Associates is? Do you know who owns the building your office is in?" It's a holding company," Preston stammered. "Hayes Holdings." "Hayes," the judge repeated. "Does that name ring a bell, son?" Preston looked at Simone. Simone Hayes. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. "And," the judge continued, enjoying this way too much, "I believe the full name of the holding company is Maxwell Hayes International. Now I have a question for you, Mr. Walsh, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." The judge pointed a gavel at Simone. "Who is your wife's father?" Preston Walsh stood frozen in the center of the courtroom, his mouth slightly ajar, looking like a fish pulled violently from the water. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the static electricity of a disaster unfolding in slow motion. "Hayes," Preston whispered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at Simone. She was no longer the quiet woman who archived dusty books. She was a statue of judgment, her eyes cold and hard. "Answer the question, Mr. Walsh." Judge Abernathy pressed, leaning back in his chair with the terrifying calmness of a predator toying with its food. "Who is your wife's father?" I don't know," Preston stammered, his arrogant facade cracking like cheap plaster. "She told me he was retired. She said he used to work in administration." Simone stepped forward, her heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. "I told you he was in legal administration, Preston. I never lied. You just never asked for details because you were too busy talking about yourself." She turned to the gallery. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man walked in. He was in his late 60s, wearing a suit that cost more than Preston's entire wardrobe. He moved with a cane, not out of weakness, but with the authority of a scepter. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He had the same dark, intelligent eyes as Simone. It was Maxwell Hayes. Every lawyer in the city knew the face. Maxwell Hayes wasn't just a lawyer. He was a titan of industry. He had founded Hayes and Associates, which later acquired Sterling Cooper through a shell company. He sat on the board of the state bar. He was the kind of man who didn't just win cases. He decided if a case was even allowed to exist. Preston's lawyer, Roger Sterling, actually dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. "Mr. Hayes." Judge Abernathy nodded respectfully. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "I'm just here to support my daughter, Thomas," Maxwell said, his voice deep and gravelly. He didn't look at the judge. He looked straight at Preston. The look was withering. It was the look a boot gives an ant. Preston felt his knees shaking. He grabbed the table for support. His mind was racing back through the last 5 years. The dinner parties. Simone had always been vague about her family. The wedding. Her side of the aisle had been small, mostly family friends. Preston had been too drunk on his own importance to realize those friends were senators and federal judges. The job. He had gotten his position at Sterling Cooper miraculously fast after meeting Simone. He thought it was his brilliance. "Oh, God," Preston breathed. You got me the job." Simone looked at him, her expression softening only slightly into pity. "My father wanted to see if you were worthy. He opened the door. You were the one who walked through it and decided to act like you owned the building." "And regarding the prenuptial agreement," Judge Abernathy interrupted, bringing the focus back to the legal slaughter at hand. "Mr. Sterling, you argued that Mrs. Walsh contributed less than 10% to the household income." "Yes, Your Honor," Roger squeaked. He was sweating profusely now. "That is technically true," Simone said, "because I routed my trust fund dividends, which amount to roughly $40,000 a month, back into charitable foundations. I lived on my librarian salary to see if my husband loved me. For me." She paused, letting that sink in. "He didn't," she added simply. "He loved the idea of a wife who was beneath him. He loved feeling superior. And when he got bored, he went to Brittany." Preston felt the trap snap shut. He looked at Maxwell Hayes, then at the judge, then at Simone. "This is entrapment," Preston yelled, desperation taking over. "You hid your money. You tricked me. Fraud requires a misrepresentation of fact to gain an advantage," Judge Abernathy lectured, sounding bored. "She didn't hide assets from you, Mr. Walsh. She simply didn't use them. And according to your prenup, the one you insisted on financial disclosure is only required for marital assets. Her trust is premarital. It's untouchable." The judge picked up the binder of evidence Simone had submitted, the bad faith proof. "However," the judge continued, "you, Mr. Walsh, did hide assets. You used marital funds, money earned during the marriage, to rent an apartment at the Grandview for Ms. Saunders. You purchased a diamond bracelet from Cartier on December the 12th using the joint savings account. You booked a flight to Aspen." The judge looked over his glasses. "Did you enjoy Aspen, Mr. Walsh? I hear the skiing is lovely." Preston didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. "Under Article 14, Section B, Paragraph 3 of the prenuptial agreement," the judge read aloud, "any party found to be dissipating marital assets on an extramarital affair shall forfeit their entire interest in the marital estate to the aggrieved party." The gavel raised. "No. Please," Preston whispered. "The house. The penthouse." "Mr. Walsh," the judge said, his voice hard as iron. "You wanted strict adherence to the contract. You have it." The banging of the gavel was the sound of Preston Walsh's life imploding. "Judgment for the defendant, Simone Hayes," Judge Abernathy declared. "The court orders the immediate transfer of the marital residence at 440 Oakwood Lane to the sole possession of Simone Hayes. The court orders the immediate transfer of the downtown penthouse to Simone Hayes. The court orders the liquidation of Mr. Walsh's 401k and investment accounts with 100% of the proceeds to be transferred to Mrs. Hayes as restitution for dissipated assets." Preston slumped into his chair. He was ruined, but the nightmare wasn't over. "Furthermore," the judge said, "since Mr. Walsh is a practicing attorney, his conduct regarding the concealment of assets raises serious ethical questions. Bailiff, please secure Mr. Walsh's bar license number. I will be forwarding this transcript to the Ethics Committee." Roger Sterling, Preston's lawyer, was already packing his briefcase. He wanted to get as far away from Preston as possible. I have to go, Preston. Good luck." "You're leaving," Preston hissed. "Do something, object." "Object to what?" Roger hissed back. "You signed it. And her dad is Maxwell Hayes. If I say one more word, I'll be disbarred by lunchtime." Roger fled the courtroom. Simone walked over to the plaintiff's table. She stood over Preston. He looked up at her, his eyes red and watery. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were? We could have been a power couple. We could have ruled this city. That's exactly why, Simone said quietly. You don't want a partner, Preston. You want leverage. You want a trophy. And I am neither. She placed a small silver key on the table. What is this? He asked. The key to the Honda Civic, she said. The judge awarded me everything. But I'm feeling generous. You can have the Honda. It's in your name anyway. And where am I supposed to live? Preston demanded, his entitlement flaring up one last time. You're taking my house. You're taking the penthouse. I suggest you ask Brittany, Simone said with a small, cold smile. Although once she finds out you're broke, I wouldn't count on her hospitality. Simone turned and walked toward her father. Maxwell Hayes put a hand on her shoulder. They didn't hug. They weren't that kind of family, but the nod he gave her was filled with immense pride. They walked out of the courtroom together, leaving Preston alone at the table. Outside the courthouse, the reality of the situation hit Preston like a physical blow. He walked out onto the steps. The sun was shining, which felt insulting. He pulled out his phone. He had to call Brittany. She was his only lifeline now. Maybe they could go to the lake house. No, wait. He lost the lake house too. But she had an apartment. They could figure this out. He was still a lawyer. He could rebuild. He dialed her number. Hello. Brittany's voice was chirpy. Brittany, it's me, Preston said, loosening his tie. Listen, something happened in court. The judge, he was biased. It's a mess. What do you mean? Her voice sharpened instantly. I lost the house, Preston admitted, and the accounts. It's just a temporary setback I'm going to appeal. But I need to crash at your place for a few weeks until I get my bonus. There was a long silence on the other end. You lost the money, Brittany asked. Ideally just for now, Preston lied. But hey, we have each other, right? I'm coming over. Preston, Brittany said, her voice completely different now. Cold, detached. Don't come over. What, why? My landlord just called. He said the rent check bounced. The account you use to pay my rent. It's frozen, isn't it? Preston closed his eyes. The court order must have been immediate. Brittany, please. I can't date a broke guy, Preston, she said. I have standards. Don't call me again. Click. Preston stared at the phone. He was standing on the courthouse steps, wearing a $3,000 suit, with nowhere to go. A valet pulled up to the curb. It was Simone's 2015 Honda Civic. The valet got out and tossed the keys to Preston. Ms. Hayes said you might need this, the valet said, smirking. Preston got into the small, cramped car. It smelled of old library books and vanilla air freshener, the smell of the wife he had despised. He gripped the steering wheel and screamed. But the universe wasn't done with him yet, because while Preston thought he had hit rock bottom, he had forgotten one thing: his job. He drove to the Sterling Cooper offices. He needed to get to his office, clear his head, and figure out a strategy. He walked into the lobby, ignoring the receptionist, and headed straight for the elevators. His keycard didn't work. He tapped it again. The light blinked red. Mr. Walsh. Preston turned around. It was the head of security, a large man named Frank, who usually greeted him with a smile. Today Frank looked serious. He was holding a cardboard box. Frank, my card is demagnetized, Preston said, trying to project authority. Buzz me up. I can't do that, sir, Frank said. He held out the box. Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. We cleared out your personal effects. It's all in the box. Terminated. Preston laughed hysterically. I'm a senior associate. You can't just fire me. Who authorized this? The elevator doors behind the security desk opened. A tall, elegant woman walked out. It was the managing partner, Jessica Pearson. No relation to the TV show. Just a coincidence, but equally intimidating. I authorized it, Preston, Jessica said, walking over. Clause 4 of your employment contract. Conduct unbecoming of a representative of the firm. We just received a call from the State Ethics Board and from our majority shareholder, Maxwell, Preston whispered. Mr. Hayes was very clear, Jessica said. He does not want his daughter's ex-husband working in his building. You are banned from the premises, Preston. If you return, you will be arrested for trespassing. She turned on her heel and walked away. Frank shoved the box into Preston's chest. You need to leave, sir. Preston stumbled back out onto the street. He was holding a box containing a stapler, a picture frame face down, and a stress ball. He walked to the Honda Civic. He sat there for a long time. He had no wife, no mistress, no home, no job, and soon likely no law license. He started the car. The radio came on automatically. It was a cheerful pop song. He turned it off. He had one card left to play. He knew secrets about the firm. He knew about clients. If they were going to destroy him, he would take them down with him. He would become a whistleblower. He pulled out his phone again and dialed a reporter he knew at the City Chronicle. This is Preston Walsh, he said into the phone, his eyes manic. I have a story for you. About Sterling Cooper. About Maxwell Hayes. It's going to blow the lid off this town. He didn't notice the black SUV that had pulled up silently behind his Honda. Preston sat in the back booth of O'Malley's, a dive bar on the edge of town that smelled of stale beer and regret. He kept checking the door. The black SUV had followed him for 3 blocks before peeling off, but his heart was still hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He clutched the flash drive in his sweaty palm. This was his insurance policy. During his last few months at the firm, he had downloaded files just in case. He thought they were client lists, sensitive merger details, the kind of things that could ruin Sterling Cooper. A man in a rumpled trench coat walked in. It was Jack Reynolds, the investigative journalist from the City Chronicle. Jack looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from chasing corruption for 20 years. You look like hell, Walsh, Jack said, sliding into the booth opposite him. He didn't offer a handshake. I've had a bad day, Preston snapped. But it's about to get worse for Maxwell Hayes. Jack signaled the bartender for a coffee. Maxwell Hayes is a pillar of the community, Preston. You better have something solid. If you dragged me out here for gossip because your wife dumped you, I'm leaving. She didn't dump me. Preston lied, his ego still fighting a losing battle. I'm the victim here. They set me up. But I have the proof of their dirty dealings right here. He slid the flash drive across the sticky table. Jack picked it up, eyeing it skeptically. He pulled a battered laptop from his bag, booted it up, and inserted the drive. Preston watched Jack's face, waiting for the widening eyes, the shock, the realization that Preston Walsh was the hero of the story. Jack clicked through the files. He read for a minute, then 2. He frowned. Preston, Jack said slowly. Have you actually read these documents? I skimmed them, Preston said impatiently. It's the Oakhaven merger. They buried the environmental report. It's illegal. Yes, Jack said, turning the laptop screen toward Preston. It is illegal. But look at the signature on the compliance sign-off. Preston squinted at the screen. At the bottom of the environmental waiver, there was a digital signature. Preston Walsh. And here, Jack said, opening another file, the authorization for the offshore wire transfer to the Cayman Islands Shell Company. Authorized by Preston Walsh. Preston felt the blood drain from his face. No, I didn't sign that. That's my digital signature, but I never saw those documents. They must have used my login. Jack closed the laptop. He looked at Preston, not with excitement, but with pity. You really don't get it, do you? Jack said softly. They didn't just fire you today, Preston. They've been setting you up for years. What? Maxwell Hayes isn't stupid, Jack explained. Big firms, they always have a fall guy. Someone ambitious, arrogant, and not detailed-oriented. Someone who signs things without reading the fine print because he's too busy looking at himself in the mirror. They routed the dirty work through your account. If the SEC ever came looking, Hayes is clean. You are the one holding the bag. Preston stared at his hands. So, if you release this, Jack said, standing up and packing his laptop. I don't write a story about Maxwell Hayes being corrupt. I write a story about Preston Walsh confessing to massive corporate fraud and environmental negligence. Jack tossed the flash drive back onto the table. I can't use this, Preston, unless you want to go to federal prison for 20 years. My advice, burn it and run. Jack walked out of the bar. Preston sat there paralyzed. He wasn't a whistleblower. He was the patsy. Simone knew. She must have known. That's why she looked at him with pity in the courtroom. She knew he was walking around with a target on his back, thinking it was a cape. He grabbed the flash drive and ran out to the parking lot. He needed to destroy it. He needed to get out of the city. He reached the Honda Civic. He fumbled for his keys. Suddenly, floodlights blinded him. "Preston Walsh!" a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Freeze, put your hands in the air!" Preston shielded his eyes. The parking lot was surrounded, not by police cars, but by black SUVs with government plates. Men in windbreakers with yellow lettering were swarming toward him. FBI. The agent in charge stepped forward, gun drawn. "Preston Walsh, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." "It wasn't me!" Preston screamed as they slammed him against the hood of the Honda. "It was the firm. It was Hayes." "We have your signature on everything, Mr. Walsh," the agent said, cuffing him. "And we received an anonymous tip this morning containing the encrypted logs of your private server. The one you kept at your mistress's apartment." Preston's head slammed against the cold metal of the car. Simone. She hadn't just found the cheating evidence in the apartment. She had found the server backups he kept there for safekeeping. She had handed the cheating proof to the divorce judge and the fraud proof to the FBI. She had dismantled his life on 2 fronts, simultaneously. As they shoved him into the back of the federal vehicle, Preston saw a familiar black sedan parked across the street. The window rolled down just an inch. He couldn't see the face, but he saw a hand raise in a small, polite wave. Then the window rolled up, and the car drove away. The holding cell. The concept of time had ceased to exist for Preston Walsh. For the past 6 months, his life had been measured not in billable hours or quarterly bonuses, but in the rhythmic clanging of steel doors and the flickering buzz of a fluorescent light that never fully turned off. He sat on the edge of a cot that smelled of industrial bleach and someone else's sweat. The designer suit he had worn on the day of his arrest, the bespoke Italian wool he had been so proud of, had been stripped away, replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin. "Walsh attorney visit," A guard barked, rapping a baton against the bars. Preston stood up slowly. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair, once perfectly coiffed with expensive pomade, was now long, greasy, and greying at the temples. He shuffled down the hallway, his ankles shackled, head bowed. In the visitation room, a man was waiting for him. It wasn't a high-powered defense attorney from a white shoe firm. It was David Klein, a public defender with coffee stains on his tie and dark circles under his eyes. Preston's assets had been frozen, seized, or funneled to Simone. He couldn't afford a private lawyer. He was at the mercy of the state. "David," Preston said, sitting down and rubbing his wrists. "Tell me you have good news. Tell me you found a loophole in the digital signature logs." David Klein didn't look up from his file. He flipped a page, sighed, and finally met Preston's gaze. "I'm going to be straight with you, Preston. I've been reviewing the discovery from the prosecutor. It's a mountain. They have the server logs, the environmental reports, the wire transfers. And they have the metadata proving your login credentials were used to authorize every single transaction." "I told you," Preston hissed, leaning forward. "It was a setup. Maxwell Hayes used me as a scapegoat. I didn't read those documents." "Ignorance is not a defense for an officer of the court," David said sharply. "You signed them. You were a senior associate. You had a fiduciary duty to know what you were signing. But that's not the worst part." Preston felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What's the worst part?" "The worst part is the witness list," David said. He slid a piece of paper across the metal table. Preston looked at the name at the top of the list. Brittany Saunders. "She's cut a deal, Preston," David explained quietly. "Full immunity in exchange for testimony. She's going to testify that you bragged about the off-the-books bonuses. She's going to testify that you told her you were untouchable because you knew where the bodies were buried. She handed over the emails you sent her from your personal account, the ones where you joked about the idiots at the EPA." Preston stared at the name. Brittany. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The woman who had sat across from him at the Golden Steer and told him he was a genius. "She's lying," Preston whispered. "She's twisting my words." "It doesn't matter," David said, closing the file. "The jury is going to see a wealthy, arrogant lawyer who cheated on his wife, defrauded the government, and tried to blame his father-in-law. They are going to hate you, Preston. The prosecutor is offering 15 years if you plead guilty today. If we go to trial, you're looking at 25 minimum." "I am not pleading guilty." Preston snarled, a flash of his old arrogance returning. "I am Preston Walsh. I can talk my way out of anything. Put me on the stand. I'll charm the jury. I'll make them see the truth." David looked at him with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Preston, don't do this. You're not the smartest guy in the room anymore. You're the defendant." "We go to trial," Preston said, leaning back. "I'll represent myself if I have to." The trial of the century. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and it was a bloodbath. Preston had insisted on taking an active role in his defense, whispering frantically to David Klein, passing notes, and occasionally trying to stand up and object, only to be admonished by Judge Hawthorne, a federal judge who had even less patience than Judge Abernathy. The courtroom was packed every day. The press was there, hungry for the story of the golden boy who fell from grace. But the person Preston looked for every day, Simone was never there. She didn't come to gloat. She didn't come to cry. She simply didn't care enough to show up. That indifference hurt more than hatred. Then came the day of Brittany's testimony. She walked to the stand, looking modest, wearing a grey cardigan and little makeup. She looked innocent, vulnerable. "Ms. Saunders," the prosecutor. A sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins began. "Can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" "We were involved," Brittany said softly, wiping a fake tear. "He told me his marriage was over. He told me his wife was cruel to him. I didn't know he was using me." Preston gripped the defense table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Liar," he thought. "You asked for the Cartier bracelet. You picked out the condo. And did Mr. Walsh ever discuss his work at Sterling Cooper?" "Yes." Brittany nodded. "He drank a lot. When he was drunk, he would laugh about how easy it was to move money around. He called it the shell game. He said he was smarter than the partners. He said he was going to take the firm for everything it had, just like he was taking his wife." The jury turned to look at Preston. Their faces were stony, disgusted. "He used to keep a server in my apartment," Brittany continued. "He told me it was for video games. I didn't know it was full of illegal bank transfers until the FBI showed me. I felt so betrayed. I was just a pawn in his game." "Objection," Preston shouted, standing up. "She's lying. She spent the money. She knew everything." "Sit down, Mr. Walsh," Judge Hawthorne bellowed. "One more outburst and I will have you removed." Preston sank back into his chair, breathing heavily. He looked at Brittany. She met his eyes for a split second. There was no love there, no regret, just the cold, hard calculation of a survivor. She had done exactly what he had tried to do to Simone. She had secured her own safety at the expense of someone else. It was hard karma, reflecting back at him in real time. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, the room went deadly silent. Preston stood, trembling. He looked at the 12 strangers who held his fate in their hands. "In the matter of the United States of America versus Preston Walsh." The foreman read, his voice steady. "On count 1, securities fraud, guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, guilty. On count 3, embezzlement, guilty." The word rang out like a bell 12 times in a row. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." Judge Hawthorne looked down at Preston over his spectacles. "Mr. Walsh, throughout this trial, you have shown zero remorse. You have blamed your colleagues, your ex-wife, your mistress, and even the system itself. You used your knowledge of the law to break it, and you used your position of power to exploit those around you." The judge paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to a term of 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for the first 12 years. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $4 million. Court is adjourned." The gavel banged. Preston's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. 15 years. He would be nearly 50 years old when he got out. His career was gone. His reputation was incinerated. He was nothing. As the bailiffs hauled him up to cuff him, he looked toward the back of the courtroom. The doors were opening. Standing there just for a moment was Maxwell Hayes. Maxwell didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just watched. He watched the man who had tried to hurt his daughter get dragged away in chains. Then he adjusted his suit jacket, turned around, and walked out into the sunlight. The Library of Irony. 6 months later. Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville. Preston Walsh was no longer a lawyer. He was inmate number 89,402. His days of arguing motions and sipping champagne were replaced by a routine of mind-numbing repetition. Wake up at 6 a.m. Count. Breakfast, watery oatmeal. Work duty. Lunch. Yard. Count. Dinner. Sleep. Because he was educated, the warden had assigned him to the prison library. It was a cruel joke. Preston, who had mocked Simone for being a librarian for archiving dust, was now spending 8 hours a day taping the spines of tattered paperback novels and organizing legal textbooks for inmates who were trying to appeal their own sentences. The library was small-smelling of mildew and old paper. It was Preston's own personal purgatory. One Tuesday afternoon, a shipment of donated books arrived. It was Preston's job to catalogue them. He worked mechanically stamping the inside covers. The Great Gatsby, stamp. To Kill a Mockingbird, stamp. Introduction to Family Law. He paused. He held the textbook in his hands. It was an old edition, heavy and worn. He remembered studying this exact book in law school. He remembered how he had felt back then, full of promise, convinced he would rule the world. He opened the front cover to place the prison's property stamp. His hand froze in mid-air. There on the inside pocket was an old archival stamp from the City Public Library system from 5 years ago. And below the date a signature in neat, precise blue ink, archived by S. Hayes. Preston stared at the signature. The letters were perfectly formed, elegant and unpretentious. Simone. She was everywhere. Even here, in the darkest hole of his life, she was present. He couldn't escape her. He realized then that she hadn't just defeated him. She had outlasted him. She had done her job with care and integrity, leaving a mark that endured while his own legacy of shortcuts and greed had crumbled to dust. He sank to the floor of the prison library, clutching the book to his chest. A laugh bubbled up in his throat, a dry, jagged sound that turned into a sob. He was the smartest man in the room, sitting on a linoleum floor in a sunk crying over a book stamp. That night in his cell, Preston borrowed a pen and a piece of paper from his bunkmate. He didn't try to write an appeal. He didn't try to write to a senator. He wrote the only thing that mattered. He wrote a letter to the woman he had underestimated. The phoenix rises. While Preston was staring at concrete walls, Simone Hayes was standing in a cathedral of glass and light. It was the grand opening of the Hayes Cultural Center. The building was magnificent, a modern architectural marvel designed to house the largest collection of African-American legal history in the country. It was Simone's passion project, funded by her trust fund, and the massive settlement she had received from the dissolution of Sterling Cooper's assets. The atrium was filled with the city's elite. But this time they weren't there for Preston. They were there for her. Simone wore a dress of royal blue that seemed to shimmer under the lights. She moved through the crowd with a grace that commanded respect. She wasn't hiding in the corner anymore. She was the hostess, the visionary. Simone. She turned to see her father Maxwell approaching. He looked older, relying more on his cane, but his eyes were bright with pride. "Dad," she smiled, taking his arm. "What do you think? Did we get the lighting right in the gallery?" "It's perfect," Maxwell said, looking around. "Your mother would have loved it." "I think so too," Simone said softly. Maxwell reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. "I have something for you. It came to the old office address. Security screened it. It's from Otisville." The mood shifted instantly. Simone looked at the envelope. It was cheap, rough paper. The return address was a string of numbers and the name Walsh. "Do you want me to throw it away?" Maxwell asked. "You don't have to read it." Simone hesitated. For a moment she felt a flicker of the old fear, the fear of his judgment, his voice in her head telling her she wasn't enough. But then she looked around the room. She looked at the building she had built. The fear evaporated. "No," she said. "I want to read it." She stepped into a quiet alcove near the garden entrance and tore open the envelope. Simone. "I have a lot of time to think in here." The silence is loud. I think about the dinners where I talked over you. I think about how I laughed when you said you liked your job. I called it boring. I called it small. Today I was assigned to the prison library. I found a book. You archived it 5 years ago. I saw your signature. I realized something today that I should have realized 5 years ago. You were never just anything. You were the foundation. I was trying to build a skyscraper on a swamp, and I blamed the ground for sinking. The judge asked who your father was. I thought that was the moment I lost. But I was wrong. I lost the moment I decided you were someone I could use instead of someone I could love. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I can't afford it, and you shouldn't give it. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. Congratulations on the center. I read about it in the newspaper. It sounds magnificent. Preston Simone read the letter twice. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a profound sense of release. It was the final confirmation. The ghost that had haunted her, the voice that said she was boring, plain, unlovable, was gone. The man who owned that voice was sitting in a cell taping books, finally understanding the value of her work. Maxwell was watching her from a distance, looking concerned. Simone folded the letter. She walked over to him. "Well," Maxwell asked, "is he begging for money?" "No," Simone said. "He's just remembering." She looked at a trash can near the entrance. She held the letter over it. "Are you going to keep it?" Maxwell asked. "Frame it. Proof that you won." Simone dropped the letter. It fluttered down into the darkness of the bin, landing on top of a discarded cocktail napkin. "No," Simone said, her voice clear and strong. "I don't need a souvenir from a life I've outgrown. I won a long time ago, Dad. He's just finally catching up to the news." She turned back to the party. The jazz band was starting to play a lively, upbeat tune. The room was full of friends, colleagues, and a future that belonged entirely to her. "Come on," Simone said, linking her arm with her father's. "I saw a waiter with those crab cakes you like. Let's go get some before they're gone." "You're buying," Maxwell teased, his eyes twinkling. "I'm always buying," she laughed. "I'm the CEO." They walked back into the light, leaving the letter and Preston Walsh in the dark where they belonged. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Preston Walsh, the man who thought he was the main character, only to realize he was just the villain in someone else's success story. He celebrated his divorce with champagne, thinking he had stripped his wife of everything. Instead, he stripped himself of the only person who might have saved him from his own greed. It is a brutal, real-life lesson in hard karma. When you dig a grave for someone else, make sure you aren't the one falling in. Simone didn't just survive, she thrived. She proved that dignity, intelligence, and patience are louder than any expensive suit or arrogant shout. Preston is currently serving year 1 of his 15-year sentence archiving books in a prison library, while Simone is building a legacy that will last generations. Now I have a question for you. Do you think Preston's realization in prison was genuine, or was he just feeling sorry for himself because he got caught? And have you ever seen hard karma hit someone this hard in real life? Tell me your stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this long-form story of betrayal and justice, please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. We bring you the best drama stories every single day. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.